India will become the third economic superpower by 2037 and a $10 trillion economy by 2035. Center for Economics and Business Research, a leading London-based consultancy, has said. According to published report, the world is moving towards recession. However, over the next 5 years, the annual rate of India's GDP growth is expected to average 6.4%, after which it is expected to grow at average of 6.5% in the subsequent 9 years. The growth trajectory will see India rise place on the World Economic League table in 2022 to third in the global rankings by 2037, it said. According to the report, the pandemic had a particularly devastating effect in an absolute terms, and India had the third highest death toll globally, yet the economy bounced back. In 2035, we forecast that India will become the third trillion-dollar economy. Although there are political factors that could hold India back, it has demographics on its side, the report said. The report also played down concerns over high inflation, saying it has remained lower than in most other large economies. Much of India's current inflation rate reflects higher food prices, an erratic item, but one that also accounts for a larger share of the consumer basket than any other G20 country, CEBR added. Let's watch a video where Ray Dalio and Bill Gates discuss India's journey to becoming a $10 trillion economy. They discuss the Indian's potential for economic growth and transformation, as well as its position in the neutral countries in the world's power conflict. The speakers also examine India's current policies, especially those related to labor, land, and manufacturing, and identify areas where reform is needed. The conversation includes an interview with Ashwini Vaishnav, the Minister of Railways of India, who discusses the government's approach to making India's economy resilient and attractive to supply chain participants. Additionally, Goel highlights the government's investment in infrastructure, railways, highways, power transmission, and job creation. The video provides insight into India's role in the multipolar world and its roadmap for achieving economic growth.
What is India?
India is the country, from all of the statistics using 10-year growth rates and also just what's apparent, India will have probably the greatest growth rate, the fastest growth rate economically, have the greatest transformation of any country. And I would say, like, if I was going to paint the world, there is this great power conflict and lots of things going on that are great and terrible in both China and the United States. And then there's the countries that are not in that, the neutral countries. So here we are in the UAE, and you think about what's going on here and in Saudi and so on. Or you go to Singapore and you look at what's happening in the ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on, and you look at India. It's an advantage through all history and world wars. Those that have not been involved in the wars and stand aside from the wars actually prosper from whatever conflicts exist. So we're going to have different types of wars between those two states, but India is going to be. India will do great, I think, and then the question is, what does that mean for the rest of us?
Well, India has a lot of very socialistic policies having to do with labor and land, and the fact that it has not risen as a manufacturing power is an indictment of its government policies. That is, as China's incomes went up, the place that the world should have moved to next as the manufacturing hub of the world absolutely should be India. And that's only happening to a very, very tiny extent. And it has to do with, regulatory complexities, infrastructure quality. Now, I'm optimistic about India. We put more into India than any country in the world. India benefits from a funny form of competition, which is competition between the states. And so, when one state really gets its act together, the other states tend to feel jealous, and they, are kind of looking at what policies led to that.
I want to understand from you, how is the Indian government looking at the multipolar world today, India's role in it, and specifically in terms of a roadmap to be able to get to whether it's 5 trillion or 10 trillion? Where do you believe we stand on the reform roadmap? How much more work needs to be done?
Thank you, Shireen. India has approached this entire transition which is happening in the world on multiple dimensions. The first dimension is to make sure that India's economy is resilient. There is a good, consistent 6 to 8% growth rate for a complete decade. It's not just 1 year or 2 year kind of thing. The thought process and the policy framework which follows is for a complete decade, 6 to 8% growth with very moderate inflation. The second dimension is when the world is looking for resilient supply chains, and as you said in your opening statement, India has a very young population. So how do we attract large number of supply chain participants to India? How do we make it resilient? He put entire capital of the country into investment in infrastructure. Now, investment in railways, last year the capex was 23 billion US. This year the capex is, this fiscal which ends on 31st March, the capex is going to be of the order of 26 billion US. Same is the story in railway, in highway, in power transmission. That increases the productivity of the country and gives us the long-term growth potential of the country improves. It's resulting into huge employment generation. Today the country is adding on an average 1.5 million people into formal jobs every month. So that kind of those decisions have shaped the country's destiny over the last few years, and that has put us on a very consistent growth path of 6 to 8%. India is used to an inflation rate of 5 to 7% because large part of our energy is imported. So having inflation today at 5.8, 5.9%, that's the latest print. That's very moderate. So high growth, moderate inflation. This we were able to achieve because Prime Minister took very pragmatic and a very focused approach. One very important part of this entire decision making was Prime Minister ensured that the fiscal policy and monetary policy, they work in tandem. There are so many examples in the world, I wouldn't take any names, where the fiscal policy was going in one direction and the monetary policy was going in another. Our central bank didn't have to drop the interest rates like a brick, didn't have to increase the interest rate like a balloon. It was a very moderate, very balanced view of things. So our central bank today is in a very good position with a good balance sheet of the central government. Our central government's liabilities are just about 52% of the GDP, and GDP growing nominal at 11-12% is a very good situation to be in. So I think, yes, fiscal consolidation is a very important priority. But what is important is we have to look at growth as the primary driver, moderate inflation as the primary decision point, and combine the fiscal and monetary policy to continue that momentum for next 10 years.